Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another video with Tracee Garner. I'm doing my 52-week Write with Tracee challenge, and today's video is about working with an editor and how to find one. A lot of people ask, why do I need an editor? And the answer is very simple, really. You need an editor because you are not objective to your own work. You don't see the things that other people's eyes have seen. You are too close to the work. And unless you are a grammarian and can find all the tiny little details, even the ones that your brain compensates for, you're really just not objective enough to edit your own work. I think having an editor, even two sometimes, is worth their weight in gold and the price you pay. I think they do a wonderful job at enhancing the work, finding mistakes, proofreading, and even a developmental editor, which we'll talk about later, is good at finding plot holes and listening at the words and how they sound to see when things don't work or are very complex and not quite putting home or driving home the point that you were trying to make. You know what you meant when you wrote the work, and that's fine. But you don't get to sit on someone's shoulder and tell them, wow, what I really meant here was blah, blah, blah. And what I really meant over here was this, this, and this. You don't get that luxury, unfortunately. And so your work is alone. It has to stand on its own when the reader is reading and trying to enjoy it. And it just doesn't, you don't get to explain away some of the issues and hiccups that will come about as you write. I am a fast typist, and sometimes my brain thinks of a thought or tries to convey a piece of literature in a way that I understand it, made sense to me, but I wouldn't want anyone to say that didn't really make sense. And I could have had an editor to help explain that to me and to also help me fix it. You really need to think of your editor as a tool and as a helpful but objective person that's looking at your work and taking in everything and trying to really understand it and enjoy it, because that is the main goal. Here are 5 things that you should know in order to find an editor and know what to expect from them so you can enjoy working with them and you can have a great relationship for as long as you can. It's also important to note that sometimes editors are going to move on. They'll have children and they'll have their own life things that they want to get to. And it's really important that you not take that personally. An editor leaving a job happened to me. They became pregnant, and it's totally understandable that they would go on maternity leave and your projects would be handed off to someone else. However, that is an adjustment period, and you need to realize that sometimes that new person, you won't work as well as you had with the other person, but you need to find a way to work with them. You also have to take into account that this person isn't the same. They don't work the same. You may not gel as well as you did. And in some cases, you may gel even better. They just may be better as far as personality and as far as how they look at your work. So the first thing is, where do you even look? You want to look in lots of different places, but you want to start with your friends and your own circle and use word of mouth. I have found people just by saying, hey, do you know this person? Or do you know that person? And I've also found a lot of people by looking in the groups that I'm in. I'm in about 5 different writers organizations, which I mentioned, and some of the editors are also in there. They're looking for work, they're looking for clients, and then probably some of the other writers that are also in that organization have worked with them and can vouch for them about using them. The next place is just editorial magazines. If you read the Writer magazine or Writer's Digest, both of those come out monthly. Those in the back of those, there are often classified ads. And where better to put an ad for being a writer than a place where writers are going to find instruction and articles and how-to information. So in the back, you'll need to look up their website, look at who they are, and also they should be willing to list who they've already edited and worked with, the books that they have, and see how those books are faring. What you should also do is go read the reviews about those books. And if people mention that grammar and editing and other issues are number one things that they have found with the book, it's not always the editor's fault, but sometimes authors move forward without taking into consideration and implementing the editor's notes and the ideas that the editor shared with the author. So before you think about blaming the editor, an author can move forward with publishing his or her work without listening to the editor at all. So take even those with a grain of salt. The next place to look is inside the books of those books you are reading, if it's similar to your genre. So when I look at other romance authors and I look at their books, sometimes I'll read the acknowledgments and see where they have thanked people. I'll look and see who they have thanked, and if they list the person by name and also their editorial business name or whatever their name is, so I can go look them up and see. But I also am careful that I only look at those editors mentioned who have the same genre, either writing romance or any type of fiction and romantic suspense. You want an editor that actually enjoys reading that type of genre, or otherwise they may be prone to picking out things that really don't even matter or that is necessary for a romance, that they like reading thrillers. And sometimes they want to edit out romance because they don't particularly like it or they think it's too much. Well, if it is a romance, then there should be a lot of romance in it. And if it's a suspense, it doesn't necessarily mean there has to be a lot of thriller in it, but just kind of a little bit of drama and extra things that happen in the book that make it suspenseful. But thriller and suspense are two different types of categories within all of the genres that exist. Finally, the next place to look is in with the groups that you participate in. Not necessarily the writers' organizations, but I'm also on listservs for writers. These are just groups where people pose questions, they talk about different topics, there's just a steady flow of information and a question of the day from all kinds of different writers, sometimes several thousand. What you can do is, if you join any group, is to check the archives and use keywords to see what people are putting out. A lot of groups are really good about using keywords so that people can find different topic threads, but some, they're just not. Everything's a jumbled mess and you can't find anything. But I also recommend that you still post the question that you are looking for an editor, and you will take recommendations, start to cut and paste all of the names that you receive, and then move forward with researching them. Those are just some of the ways that you can find an editor, but I list more ways in one of my Instagram posts, which I'll share here. The next question is, what do I expect from an editor, and what should I expect? Well, the first thing that you'll expect is that you'll make some kind of initial contact. You'll email them saying, hey, this is the project that I'm working on, and be sure to describe the project in detail so that they can get an idea of what you need and what you're writing. This is very important. Sometimes people leave off details. The editor is not able to make a good decision about what it is they're getting into, what type of project it is, and how lengthy it is. These are two really important things that you need to include so that the editor can understand what the work is. You'll also want to see and be looking for how the editor responds. Do they seem upbeat? And I realize it's hard to tell in an email how people feel, but I feel like there is often an underlying idea of how the editor responds to you. It's important not to read too much into that back and forth communication that's only over email or text, but you still can infer some things and be looking out for things. The first thing is that if the editor is responding quickly, and if the editor seems too eager or too lax about your work, they may be already booked up and they might not be able to take something right away, or they just may be never getting any clients and they're happy to take whatever it is. So you have to know kind of what their schedule is and how they respond, and really take all of that into account as you think about working with them long term. And sometimes people will respond very quickly. All the emails will go back and forth between the two of you in a very rapid way. But then when it's time to actually submit your work, they don't ever check in, they don't ever say anything, and you kind of wonder what happened. They do a lot of work to get you in to their contacts and get you going and get you excited, but then communication kind of falls off. And the other thing is that you have to be patient too. It takes a little bit of time to edit a book. You don't get turnarounds within a week. Sometimes it can be anywhere from 2 to even 4 to 6 weeks for them to edit an entire book. Remember, they have other clients that they're working with. They have families that they are working with. So you need to really try to zero in and hone in on the amount of time that an editor needs to do your work. And you also need to base that on the length. We're talking about a 200 to 400 page novel. That's a longer time. We're talking about a shorter nonfiction book that may be 160 pages, then that should take a little bit less time. And nonfiction books can be complex, but they're not as complex as looking at plot issues that you have when you submit your fiction to someone. The editor will expect to see some of your work. No one should go into an agreement blindly without knowing how many mistakes there are in your work just by editing those few pages, or how much time it's going to take. Nonfiction should sometimes, not all the time, take less time because there isn't any plot issues, there aren't any characters. It's usually just straightforward information. Whereas fiction has a lot of characters, a lot of winding turns and climax, cliffhanger, all kinds of things, little plot points that need to be worked out and need to be thought through. So it's not just the editing of the work for mistakes and grammar errors, but it's also the other things that need to be accounted for. You're going to send a partial of your work, usually about 1 to 3 chapters. It really depends on the editor, but usually people work really hard on their first chapters until they're near perfect. And sometimes that is not a good gauge of how you really write. You want the chapters, particularly if you're looking for a publishing deal, when you send partials to the publishing house, that first chapter is all you really have. So you make it the best you can be. And you sometimes leave other things kind of not as stellar as that first punch is. But it'll be important that I would say at least 3 chapters is a good partial for an editor to see how you work. And I would also say the first 3 chapters so that the editor can go in order and begin to understand how they are feeling about the work and if they feel that it's building enough of the intrigue and interest to keep going through the entire book. They may also decide that this work is just not what they want to edit and, decline your offer. But it's important that you follow up and ask if they know any other editors who do read your work and who would like to work with you. Never leave just with an outright no. Always ask, well, is there anyone you can refer? And I recommend this just in life in general. Everything that I ask somebody for, even if they say no, I come back and say, well, can you recommend someone? Doctors, lawyers, searching for any kind of services, whatever it is, always go that extra mile to ask people. When you receive a quote and you receive your partial back and it's edited, you want to look through it. You really feel like they paid attention to detail. Did they really edit your work, or is it marked up? Are there things there that you can be like, wow, I think that is true. I agree with that particular comment on my work. They should be writing sentences like, this is unclear, maybe try this instead. They may even offer a suggestion. Remember, what the editor offers you are all suggestions. At the end of the entire work being edited, you can choose to accept or reject any of the changes if your editor is going to use track changes. So you'll receive a quote based on the partial and based on the number of pages and words you said that the work was. This brings up a good point, and an important detail is that you should not be contacting an editor before the work is done. If you don't know the exact page count and the exact word count, then the editor cannot make a good estimate on cost. What if you submit something and you have about 20 more pages to write, but you're submitting it to the editor now? You need to let them know that. But I would argue that you don't really know if it's 20 pages. What if it's really 30? Or what if it's 10 pages more that you need to add? So the same goes with contacting the publishing house. Do not contact them before the work is done and edited, and do not guesstimate how lengthy or how long or how many words you think the project is. Really have those concrete numbers in your mind and on paper as it looks and as the Word document or whatever you're using states. Next is that before you send a partial, don't put your project through Grammarly unless or any other grammar editing software program. Grammarly is a program that will, for free, do some light editing of your work. It'll correct any grammatical areas and highlight those for you so you can change them, or it will give you some details about some of the issues with the work, unclear sentences, commas in the wrong place, subjective words, and words that come across too strongly or too passive voice. Grammarly is a wonderful tool, and I list 5 other tools that are similar to Grammarly on my writer's resources page at TraceeGarner.com. But my point is, you can also pay for Grammarly for a pro version and other versions in the other programs that I also list. But if you're going to do that first, are you going to do that for the entire book? You can do it for the entire book, and you can cut and paste parts of your book or the entire book into Grammarly and have it edited that way. But nothing compares to having a live person with a live view and a real working brain to look at your work, and that is important. Grammarly and other programs should never be a substitute. And sometimes they make mistakes and list things that are not really what you're looking for. They don't understand how story works. And so that is important to note. Your brain has created an awesome story or an awesome piece of nonfiction, but some of the software programs may hiccup on understanding very complex details, something the brain can actually figure out, the human brain. When you receive your work back from the editor, you want to make sure that you are looking at everything. Did they comment on things that you needed them to comment on? And what type of editing do they do? There are 3 kinds of editing that you need to think about. There's line editing and developmental editing, and then improve. I will cover the 3 types of editing for my work that I use. Now, there are many more, and however, you don't always need all of those for your work. There are 3 kinds of editing that I have my editor do. Copy and line editing are about the same. They mean the same things. That means focusing specifically on the content and the flow of your work. It's also sometimes called stylistic editing. The next editing service that I have I want to make sure that you understand my one editor does all 3 of these for my work. So I'm not going to different editors for, hey, can you do the copy and line editing? Hey, can you do the proofreading? And then, hey, can you do developmental edits? The second is proofreading, making sure that there are no spelling or grammatical errors, making it the final version of your work. Really seeing about those commas and that spelling and making sure that everything makes sense and reads correctly. Finally, developmental edits, or about the story structure, making sure the content is substantive, editing, and it involves an editor providing detailed feedback on the larger issues. So really the whole of the book is what you can consider developmental editing, where the editor is looking at the total sum of the book. Does it make sense? Does this plot work out? Did you leave something off? Is there a character that is missing that you didn't wrap up? Are there details of the story that don't make sense or that seem even to lack something, lack a plausible solution, lack a real understanding, or leaving parts off in the end where the reader is like, well, what happened to this part, or what happened to that part? You don't want readers to ask those questions. That is something a developmental edit can help you do. I have copy editing and line editing, one and the same, proofreading, like I said, and developmental edits. Those are the three services that the editor that I work with works on and does for me. Next is, what can you expect to receive? I already mentioned that the sample you'll receive should be edited, and you should take a look at how she gives ideas, how she suggests changes, and how she edits the work in the partial that you received. If you like that, you'll then move forward with the contract. You tell her, I like the way, or him, you tell her, him, I like the way you've edited this. I am receptive to your ideas, and the suggestions that you have made make sense to me. And you send that, and they will return a contract to you. Make sure that you use some of your writer organizations to help you ensure that that contract is the way that it should be, and there's no other details in there that don't pertain to the work. For the most part, editors and such have straightforward contracts. They're not pages and pages long. They always should include that you retain full rights to the information and to the document and the story or the book, and that they are just editing it. That doesn't mean they get any credit for anything that they have done. You can acknowledge them if you want, but you don't have to. That is totally a preference that they have. And sometimes they probably can reserve the right, not if you don't take what they've said in the examples that they gave, they probably can have the right not to put their name on your book either, because maybe you didn't adhere to all the suggestions they made, and maybe your book might fail because of that. They don't want that to also bring their company down, and the clients that have really listened to them and implemented their changes, they don't want that on them either. So it'll be important for you to think about that. You should expect to receive the completely edited manuscript, however you decide to do that. I've been in this business a long time, and as such, I was originally sending the changes and the manuscript in a print form, and then packaging it up and mailing it to my editor, who was in New York at the time. Now I send it as a Word document, and the editors make the changes using track changes. That is the best way for me to get the changes made. And sometimes some editors, not all of them, they'll send you an editorial letter. And I have shared that in a blog post that I will link here for you to see. I share the full letter that the editor shared with me. You can get a copy of it. And I also break down how you can go about implementing the edits when they seem really voluminous and really difficult and hard. They're not really that hard. It's just that your brain can sometimes be overwhelmed by the number of edits that you received, and that's okay. I have always felt this way every single time I get a letter, and it kind of lists out some things for me to think about, and I think, how in the world am I going to fix this? But when I take the time to really read the letter in full, I start to just break down one bullet at a time, and eventually in a week or 2 weeks, I have figured out everything that they were saying, and I also agree with them. So when you first receive that editorial letter and all those edits that come along with it, you really need to take a step back and see that this person means for this book to be the best it can be. They want to also not offend you. They're not out to get you, and it's really important that you separate those feelings from the actual business of writing and enhancing your work. When I used to receive edits years ago, especially when I moved from one editor to another because my work was handed off because the editor was going on leave, I really, as an immature person in my 20s, could not understand the edits. I thought that they were ripping me apart. These are my feelings. Oh my gosh, how could you do this? Why? Why did you say all this? Why is there so much red on this paper? Why does it look like you dropped a ball of cayenne pepper on my manuscript? How dare you? And so you really have to evolve and grow up and be mature and say, this is to enhance your work. This is to help it be the best it can be in the marketplace. Other people are getting several eyes at their looking at their book. They have a whole team through a regular publishing house or a traditional publishing house. And this is not about you. This is about a product and making sure that it looks good and that it sounds good and people can read it and enjoy it without all the hiccups of mistakes and, passive voice and all of the other issues that your work can have. So you really have to take time to understand that they mean all the good to you. They don't mean anything bad. They want the work to be its best as it can be. And when you understand that, you'll tackle those edits with vigor and with renewed hope, even though at first, when you first get it, they are going to seem daunting and like you can't do it. Like, I've been working on this for almost a year, and yet there's still more work to be done, and that's okay. When you read the entire letter, you'll see that you can really work out these kinks. And honestly, some of the kinks that the person wrote about, remember, they're writers too, they're editors. They seemed so complex, but when I took them one by one and really began to break them down, it was just a couple word changes, or it was changing the character to do this instead of that, or very simplistic things, but the total sum of the parts of the different bullets seem overwhelming. Finally, you can just accept the changes or work through each one. What I do is I usually accept all changes. That gets rid of all the red and all the comments, and I print out a clean copy. I always separate the two versions because they'll usually change the name with their initials, which is what my editor does, but I don't know what other, it depends on how the editor works, but my editor will send me a copy where she has put her initials so that I can know the difference between the one I sent and the one that she edited. I will accept all the changes that she put in, and I will print out a new copy and read that like I'm reading it for the first time. What that does is that I agree with most of the things that she has said. Most of it is grammar and punctuation and spelling, but even some developmental issues, I'll need to work on those myself. She rarely will ghostwrite anything, which is really generous if some editors are willing to do that, but it shouldn't be. That is an added cost that you should not receive as part of the regular deal. But some editors do fix things for you just because it came to them, or they see a way that it makes more sense and they just go ahead and do it. And I like that. I like editors who go just a little bit extra mile. They don't have to, but I'm so grateful when they do. So every now and then my editor will fix a sentence or two, and sometimes the word isn't the word I would choose. So I'll just go and change that word, either find a new word or look back at what I originally wrote and use that somehow. You can do one or two things. You can either send the work back for a final edit, which you will need to pay additional amount for, or you can just run with it as is. After you've read it, you've made changes, and you agree, you've even read it out loud to see how it sounds, you're happy with the work. I usually move forward with my work after the first edit and then my own edit, and then we're ready to go. It's time to load and start putting into the formatting that I need and get ready with the formatting, and then get the work on Amazon and other booksellers platforms that I use. Now, the final thing is ensuring that you know how much you are going to be paying. Some editors charge by the word, some editors charge by the page. Very few editors that I've found charge by the time that it takes. Some editors are faster than others. Some really see more value in doing by page. And then again, remember, their quote is also taking into account how your mistakes come across. Are they little tedious things, comma splices and commas in them when you should have used semicolons? Those things are tedious to put in. And so I've heard editors charge anywhere from $2.50 a page all the way up to $5. And when you're looking at a 350-page book times $5, that is a lot of money. And so you have to be careful about how much you can spend and really going into it with open eyes. But you can expect to pay anywhere from $800 to probably $1,500 for a fiction book, and probably about $300, maybe $250 to anywhere between probably all the way up again to $1,200 for a nonfiction book. Again, nonfiction is usually shorter than fiction, and there are less plot details. There aren't any plot really in fiction. I'm sorry, there isn't any plot really in nonfiction. It's straightforward information usually, and it's not a convoluted hero's journey that the editor has to work with. So that's why it's going to be a little bit more for fiction than it is for nonfiction. I hope that this helps you select and find the right editor. Be sure to check out the links to the page be sure to check out the link to the blog post where I share one of my editorial letters. It was fun working with all the editors that I have worked with, and I've learned and gained so much from each of them and their different styles. So far, with 13 books, I've had about 4 different editors. My last editor that I'm currently using still has edited most of all the books that I've written. So we're up to about 7 books that she has edited. And so it has been a fun journey. I encourage you to use an editor to really work in tandem with them on the project, make it the best it can be. Look at them as a support and a helper for your work, and not as an antagonist for your work, but someone who's really trying to polish the product and make it better. The other thing I will say is that I think you should send your editor a gift sometimes. When you are done working with them, when you get really ready to release the book, send them a copy of the book, but also include things like chocolate or, a gift for the children, or even flowers. I think that these are really important things that can help build your relationship. They have provided a service, and you need to treat it like this is a business arrangement, because it is. You have an agreement with them, and you really start to get more and more involved in their life as they get involved in your life and all your characters, and seeing your career grow. So I have sent my editor chocolates or flowers and other things that I think are important just to help maintain that relationship. Look at it like corporate gifts. People send corporate gifts to their team, and if you have people that are part of your team that help you get all this writing done and enhance the writing, then why not a gift or two? Not all the time, but as much as you can afford, and as often, every other book or every book or whatever you decide. I think it's just a nice touch and a really welcome and warm thing to do for someone. Good luck finding your editor, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.